Alrighty. World building is touted as one of Project Moon's strengths. The city, a sprawling urban megacomplex, is their main world of choice for all of their stories. It's an oppressive place, split into lettered districts run by megacorporations, all beholden to a central figure simply known as the Head. These districts are further split into nests and backstreets, a clear delineation between the rich and poor, corporates and working class populations. Each are functionally self-governed, having regional rules and laws accordingly. Past there, specific factions and jobs are often outlined in depth throughout their narratives, whether these be fixer officers, wing employees, or syndicates. A good chunk of them that are relevant to the narrative in some shape or form are explored through character interactions and backstories. Now, what troubles me isn't the sheer amount of different organizations and their relation to one another. Those are often covered in the main narratives of their respective games, but instead I'd like to ask a very fundamental world-building question, one that I and many other writers hold in high regard. What do they eat? Specifically, what do they eat in the city? As for why this is such an important question in regards to world building, there's often spoken of 3 fundamental human needs. 1 I can't go into depth on YouTube, 2 being sleep, and the last being food/sustenance. Plus, as one of the most important parts of the human experience, food should be a foundational part of a world's conception. Whether this means setting up populations near water for irrigation or by the coast for seafood, heck, near fertile lands for agriculture. Even in the absence of these, we need to consider where the supplies may be coming from. But without a stable source of sustenance, a society is bound to fall apart or worse. So where the hell can we even start here? The Botany Corp doesn't offer us a huge glimpse into the city's day-to-day, as it is localized within L Corp's HQ. It can be assumed that being a part of a megacorporation means that food is a non-issue for the employees. We don't have to feed them as part of the gameplay loop either, so we skip out on any ludonarrative elements in where we would gather food or provide it to them compared to other RTS titles out there. Yes, I'm calling this game an RTS. It's how it feels when you're suppressing abnormalities and when they strip away your control of time. It's no Age of Empires where you need to farm or hunt food for your villagers, but nonetheless, the real-time elements can be troublesome. Anyhow, the art book doesn't provide any insights into what they eat, at least in terms of managerial duties. Searching eats in the art book just gets you a ton of results for death. We are going to be in for the long haul while reading through some of these. Upon gleaning through, there's a few references to consumption in the abnormality logs, rather than in the main story. Most prominent is Welcheers. In the Abno story, a corpo gets abducted and forced to work on a ship. Upon coming to, they find themselves surrounded by a beefed-up crew working their days away. The employee is offered a seafood soup full of shrimp, crab, and clams alongside all sorts of other stuff. He's rather hesitant, so perhaps this kind of seafood isn't that common in the city, though his main concern more so seems to be poison. Nonetheless, he accepts and figures that it ain't all too bad, really. The employee joins the crew, hones his craft. We get further mention of sashimi and the soup. Otherwise, mention of cracking a cold one after work. From this, we can glean that at the very least, modern fisherman's soup, sashimi, and beer are reasonably accessible. As for where this is all taking place, the reasonable assumption is one of S, T, U, or V Corp's waters, since those are what border the city. If beyond there though, then this could be a glimpse at outskirts food rather than city food. But since he's able to get his hands on beer, it is safer to assume that this is coastal city fare. As for the rest of the stories that I had the time to look over, they're less about employees getting a feed and more so about the abnormalities getting a feed through the agents. Spiderbud gets nourishment in eating agents and providing for their young. Berry Festival eats agents who work on other abnormalities under the assumption that their food is getting stolen from them. Dream and Current implies at least candy existing, but man, that thing is unnerving to look at these days. And last to mention is the Burrowing Heaven that uses employees as nourishment for its growth. These don't really tell us much about the city. Now if we move on to Ruina, we get a lot more character out of the cuisine, and some troublesome factors too. From what we can glean out the gates, enough food to live isn't exactly a huge concern in the city, but due to people's natures, there isn't always enough to go around. Funny enough, we get this kind of information directly from Greater of the 8 chefs, who claims that there's more than enough food for everyone to feast on, but people always feel there's not enough because some of them like their meals luxurious. They go on to say that 3 square meals are easy enough, but what if someone wants 4, leaving someone else with 2, and those with 2 gotta fight for the scraps? Outside of the more unique stuff on offer from District 23, Ruina makes mention of a few different food items. At the gates, we of course get Roland complaining about his Hamhampangpang and missing out on his sandwich. Since the establishment is basically supposed to exist in the city as well as real life, we can go take a quick glimpse at their menu's year-round offerings, as most of the collabs would be rather ridiculous to be served in the restaurant. Like, imagine being served the Roland bad ending plate in the city. That's gotta be some kind of special sacrilege. First off, they offer a variety of sandwiches. These are pretty normal fare: ham, bacon, sausage, shrimp, chicken, tuna, etc. Not a bad lineup. If we assume it's one-to-one with the city, then these ingredients are supposedly easy enough to come by. Past there's beverages. There's different coffees, beers, teas, and fruit, a good chunk of which seems to be very standard city offerings. Nothing too out there, so long as one can grow and harvest coffee, as well as brew alcohol. Mind you, alcohol is usually a really good way to world build, as almost all civilizations out there have come up with their own form of it. While there's a few that haven't, they are the exception to the norm. Finally, the kitchen menu is a reasonably globalized affair, having pork cutlets, hamburg steak, spaghetti, and fried food among other offerings. Plus, if we were to take Hamhampangpang's menu as a vertical slice of the city's cuisines, we're functionally left with a modern cafe's menu, which means a rather globalized cuisine can be prevalent throughout the city as necessary. Further parts of Ruina do in fact support this claim. We're going to be jumping all the way out to the index stories, specifically when Yan is passing out prescripts. We actually get a few different meals here, as the prescripts require their performers to otherwise poison or sabotage them. First, we get birthday cake. Stuff is functionally sugar, eggs, and flour, meaning the city's got some kind of dairy production or agricultural center somewhere. Otherwise, each district would need its own farms. Next is the mention of seafood cream pasta sauce. We've got some kind of seafood industry as well as pasta. We've already seen the seafood from the Welch's story, so that links up here. As for the pasta, the globalized menu offered in Hamhampangpang's cafe fare does connect here in the sense of Italian food existing in the city. This is then coupled with the mention of risotto as well, further cementing the globalization angle. Past there is the mention of mealworms. I've tried them before, and would not recommend. They are for pet consumption, not human consumption. Texture and flavor does not play nicely with humans. I repeat, do not eat the mealworms. Heck, I think they're supposed to be illegal in certain countries, so do not consume. Now, if we explore the more exotic fare offered, it's pretty much exclusive to the backstreets of District 23, home of the 8 chefs, cannibalism, and an absurd pursuit for the ultimate flavor. While it's stated that cannibalism is largely frowned upon in the city, it isn't an enforced taboo by the head. The denizens of District 23 aren't getting wiped out for doing so. Regardless, the human meat trade is normalized there, with several syndicates providing fresh bodies. Pierre and Jack's introduction gives us a lens into how cannibalism operates here. If anything, it seems rather surgical. The use of chemicals and drugs seems to be encouraged for preservation, and the freshness, age, and state of the meat seems to be accounted for. Humans are indeed treated like any other ingredients, with the only real caveat seeming to be the scarcity of it, with so many fellas vying to cook it. From personal experience, I have burnt the tip of my thumb. There's a permanent scar there, but that's not the worst of it. So I burnt it using a cigarette lighter of a car one time. When a cousin asked me to check if it was hot or not, I stabbed my thumb right into it and it seared immediately. Not a fun time, but what one of my other cousins said in the back stuck with me. That smells really good. Yeah, smells of seared pork. It's just you never want to be the seared pork. Thankfully, ethics exists here compared to District 23. Cooking someone up isn't going to happen anytime soon. All that to say, humans are just bigger pigs when it comes to meat. But we have too little meat to make it work or otherwise really make use of. The chefs of District 23 think differently, however. When facing off against Hod, Greta goes into a pretty long spiel about food, but notably about the state of humans as ingredients. Due to the wealth disparity mentioned earlier in terms of enough food for everyone's need but not enough for everyone's greed, Greta's ingredients have been getting worse. They mention that they only get greasy fatsos or skinny twigs. Both of these would indeed be unappealing in regular butchered meat. To see the same standard applied to humans as well is rather foul, but makes sense in a place where they're being treated as just that. To cap off the cannibalism part is Pierre mentioning turning humans into jam. Well, part of the process at least. They mention needing to keep them alive for as long as possible in drips of anesthetic and repressors. Not exactly how jam making works, rather that's closer to conserving or farming them, but I doubt they were going to consider the actual meat jam making process when writing this section, because it'd be far too gruesome. Past there in Pierre and Jack's story is an exceedingly brief mention of monster meat from the outskirts. We're told very little about it, except that it exists and is rare. Anyhow, for one other particularly unique provision of the city's cuisine, we've got the meat stew that Roland raves on about. Essentially, it's a stew that takes 10 seconds in a turbocharged pressure cooker using only meat and water. Bloody expensive, but apparently super rich and tender, and would otherwise be the result of boiling it for 3 days. I can assure you now that boiling meat for 3 days straight, without seasonings or any other flavorings, as proposed here, would get you meat that has sublimated with the water and the taste of a leather boot. Outside of the specific cuts with concentrations of bone marrow and fat, I would heavily suggest against actually attempting this. It really is just taking a pressure cooker to an extreme here, and I'm pretty sure Roland is just getting scammed considering the pay of a colored or otherwise grade 1 fixer. Pressure cookers as they are already turbo the process of slow cooking to an insane degree. This meat stew unfortunately just sounds stupid. It's a miracle of cookery nonetheless, with how much they are able to fast forward it, but if anything, it showcases the insane levels of luxury the rich have access to in the city. For the rest that we're privy to in Ruina, outside of Chester's coffee and Bino's tea ramblings, most of it is Korean fare. We get mention of pajong, green onion pancake. This is really cheap ass stuff to make. To want to throw it into a U-Corp preservation box, as stated by Roland, sounds extremely dumb. Heck, several cultures have some spin or variation on this. There's a Chinese version, a Vietnamese version off the top of my head, but nonetheless, this stuff is basically street food. Somehow, I feel like the wife would have preferred if he just made some for her, but his job locale was supposedly famous for it. Regardless, the other Korean fare mentioned in Ruina is Tanghua-cha, prepared by Philip for Salvador. This is a herbal-ass tea with egg yolk thrown on top. Haven't tried it for myself, but it sounds bitter as all hell, and I ain't old enough to want something stimulating in that specific way yet. These two items aren't made with particularly rare ingredients, but with everything mentioned in Hamhampangpang's menu, points towards a general cuisine of modern Korean, which makes sense due to the studio's location. So far though, the lack of mention in regards to where a lot of ingredients are sourced outside of those used for cannibalism does take away a bit from the world building. It's slightly less believable and kind of just blanketed on as a result of globalization in the city. There's no accounting for the climate or suitability of any ingredients, unless they mean to tell me that the city spans several continents in size, or isn't necessarily the only bastion of human civilization. This would require them to open trade across the world, but as it's insinuated that the city is somehow self-sufficient, they either have some crazy agricultural center they haven't shown us yet, or food was never the concern when putting the place together. Both weaken the world building dramatically, as the former would have to be some whack-ass superpower if it had a stranglehold on the food supply, whereas the latter would just be poor writing if they wished for this world to live and breathe on its own. Mind you, we're about to dive into Limbus, and while it doesn't perfectly solve the above two claims that I'm making, it still at least makes an attempt during a specific canto. First off, Limbus has us making quite the tour around the city. Some destinations even take quite a while to get to, wherein the bus is traveling through the backstreets of various districts. These range from urban shantytowns to lakes and even forested areas. With this new lens, we can kind of get the assumption that agriculture could indeed exist here, that the city isn't all just urban or ocean, but instead has pastures and countryside roads. This changes quite a lot, but more subtly compared to outright showcasing any sort of supply chain. Now that we've established that the cuisine of the city is mostly modern Korean or otherwise a global fusion, we can hone in on areas where Limbus chooses to actually show off any sort of grub or have the sinners chow down on anything of note. Mind you, the first mention of eating is sad. During Canto 1, we get the gist of how they're being fed. While Rodya may be a glutton, the sinners are apparently underfed, while Faust assures them that the meals are provided with the appropriately deemed quantities. Both Rodya and Heathcliff are not satisfied with the amount by any stretch. As for what these meals contain, we're not entirely sure yet. Being slightly hungry may be a way of making them work harder, or otherwise not give in to being satisfied and thus not drop into sloth. Regardless, it's just sad, and the next mention of food isn't all that bright either. In Canto 2, we get the circumstances of how impoverished the Eurodivi were, and some of the worst stuff Rodya had been privy to. The disparity between the rich and poor mentioned by Greta begins to echo once again, as one of the Eurodivi's youngest, Ivan, had to sate his hunger with food from the garbage. Rodya kills a tax collector and hands out food to the poor, who are then summarily pulverized by the middle after their first taste of quality meat. In stark comparison though, by the end, Virgilius is willing to let the sinners eat at a restaurant of Rodya's choice in District 10. We aren't told anything of what transpires here or the cuisine on offer. As for Canto 3, there's one depressing scene featuring food, and a more hopeful one. The depressing one features Sinclair's family around a dining table for breakfast. There's what seems to be a rather luxurious spread with fruits, what looks like sausage and mash, maybe some soup. As a well-off kiddo, Sinclair's family seems to have it quite good. Well, that is until they start replacing their heads with prosthetics. All the food items get removed, but the fruits and Sinclair's portion. All the other family members have chargers, so I guess that's what they're sustaining off of. Guess that solves what prosthetic users end up with. Rather depressing, I'd imagine. But also, who the heck puts a lemon and pomegranate in a fruit bowl? You can't really just pick those up and eat them directly, not unless you're some kind of psychopath. Maybe that's what they think Sinclair is, by not swapping over yet. Anyhow, next bit of grub we get is at the end of the canto. Here we get skewers, courtesy of Virgilius. We also get a nice bit of world building here thanks to them. Pongers doesn't understand the concept of them, while Yisung outlines that they are takochi, Korean spicy chicken skewers. This implies that Korean cuisine isn't spread throughout the entirety of the city, but there are districts that have it. We can confirm this if we assume that Heathcliff isn't entirely familiar with it either, considering he calls it Peak's Gran. Regardless, all the sinners are quite happy to get street food. Now as for Hell's Chicken, there's a stupid amount to unpack here. Out of the gate is the Bodhisattva chicken. 6-legged, 8-winged, customized poultry for the rich. Rich, tender, al dente, all to your personal preference. Rather ridiculous, but we're in a world where making a mockery of science is possible, so why not just make a chicken chimera at that point? Regardless, this whole intervalo is about Korean fried chicken and ain't subtle about it. They also plug Hamhampangpang's fried chicken. We get to see the sinners cook. They're not very good at it. Gregor remarks on making solid grub out of leftovers and cans during the war, while Ryoshu claims to be a true chef. Ryoshu's meal is an incomprehensible poultry apocalypse. Meanwhile, Gregor's feels as if it was fished clean from the dump outside. The sinner's other attempts are rather disastrous as well, until both Masot and Otis make something palatable. We learn a bit more about the cutthroat nature of restauranteering in the city. Worse, corporate espionage to bring down a family business. Some real dystopian stuff. Anyhow, what little we get of his recipe sounds like the most standard Korean fried chicken compared to the Bodhisattva chicken. Bodhisattva chicken. I am never going to be able to pronounce that right. Anyway, all it does is contribute to the modern Korean cuisine, which makes a lot of sense considering K-Corp may as well be Seoul. The last thing of consequence here is the concept incinerator. Considering whole-ass recipes and flavors can be erased, there's the very real possibility that, well, the cuisine of the city is being tailored. Now, Canto 4. I'll hit the key points here. Dongrang is supposedly working on improving livestock. While some of the sinners are repulsed at it, others see the practicality and the reasoning. Functionally, the man has made an endless live chicken butchery with a GMO'd chicken. Surprisingly utopian, at least for humans, ethically dubious, but allegedly they feel no pain. Also, hang on a second. Sinclair's family doesn't eat meat, is what it says. The fuck was the sausage supposed to be on that plate then? Please tell me I'm not going insane, right? That's a sausage, right? Regardless. Sinners do a job well done and get treated to a restaurant meal. Considering what we know of the sinners getting an appropriate amount of food otherwise, this feels like some kind of mad conditioning. Alright, C. We get a brief on U-Corp. Part of it is going over the preservation box, a wondrous piece of tech that stops things from spoiling or changing in any way until you open the packaging. I'd imagine for rich restaurants, this thing basically guarantees that not a single ingredient goes to waste. This technology alone would shake up the entire agriculture industry, as well as any kind of primary production, but at the end of the day, it's wing technology. So it ain't all too prevalent for those outside of the rich. If we're to come down to rich procurers of exotic ingredients though, this is definitely a game changer. I know it was mentioned during Ruina as well, with Roland's passion, but I reckon it deserves more of a mention here after we've established everything else. Anyhow, they do apparently use it for canning, so you know what? Maybe the farming and agricultural industry is in a utopian state here. If food can be preserved this well, there shouldn't be any shortage of it. So why is there even a disparity to begin with? This stupid box breaks a lot of the established wealth disparity, especially since Rodya is the one talking about it. The formerly impoverished Eurodivi member eating out of wing tech. Because if it's inaccessible, then perhaps she stole it. But for canned goods, I don't know, man. This feels like a bit of an oversight. Anyhow, trash crabs. Seems they're not particularly appealing in terms of food, but they are edible. Heck, Roshu and Mersault try to find ways to make them more palatable. And to their credits, they are arguing in an appropriate way in this case. Specifically, killing animals in a way that causes less pain, causes less stress to the meat. Humane butchering of animals often has benefits in cooking. So they're taking some rather solid steps in this case. Anyhow, the exception to shoddy crab flavor seems to be king trash crabs, more specifically their brain wine. Now, it's not all too strange to make wine out of animals, but most of the ones they're made of are rather nasty. I would not recommend Vietnamese snake wine, personally, though I'm also the sort that can't do tequila. You do you if ever presented the opportunity. To close out C, Olga wishes to finally splurge on pork belly. Even if they're dirt poor, I reckon they could go higher up, but I really can't place what is supposed to be expensive at this point. Okay, so we've arrived at Canto 5. I'm already tired, but here we go. The main point we're after here is whale cuisine. While whales in real life are often considered bad eating, the whales of the Great Lake seem to have some merits of some kind. Though the party is most interested in the whale ice cream. For the uninitiated, this sounds god-awful. I would be among those. But apparently, seafood-flavored ice creams are genuinely a thing out there. The inclusion here isn't the strangest. Heck, some of them are of American invention, so having them over in Ishmael's canto makes enough sense regardless. It doesn't imply all too much here, aside from some pursuit of culinary use for whales, and differing whales having differing flavors. We don't get much about a fishing industry or anything else like that either, so while there was a chance to explore more about the lakes, maybe even hear about that funny Welchers boats, we're surprisingly dry here. Yisung being sad about the whale ice cream though is pretty funny. Anyhow, moving right along, Christmas one has nothing to offer, neither does the Bones claiming one, at least nothing all too significant for us to cover. Canto 6 even offers us little to work with either. Their lead up and story has no cuisine. We don't even get fish and chips or any decent scran, not a letdown. Again, for time killing time, we don't get anything either. Warp Express though is a whole other beast. Not only do we get some confirmation on prosthetics through Sasha, but we're also introduced to blood fiends. These are non-human humans with an extreme hunger for blood. For lack of a better descriptor, they're pretty much vampires. The intense hunger they feel is supposed to drive them completely insane almost. We face off against blood bags and finally Cassetti, who's had a fresh supply of blood to nourish himself upon. The consumption of blood not only revitalizes them, but also powers them up significantly. Notably their regenerative capabilities. We get one line of foreshadowing here though. You don't know how awful it is. Surviving for 200 years off that disgusting, horrible. No, don't even want to think about it. So, let's rush over to Canto 7. We get two big things out of this. First is hemobars. These are coagulated blood bricks that taste like pastel paste. Originally, they were supposed to suppress hunger felt by blood fiends, but in the end, they were nowhere near enough. Heck, we even have a funny option during the dungeon to eat a hemobar. Doing so can lock you into eating even more hemobars, and then even more, and it's not enough. Essentially, the reason humans and blood fiends will find it difficult to coexist is the blood supply not being anywhere near enough to sustain their population. Thus, in the end, comes the extermination of La Mancha land. Now, the second thing that we get out of this canto is from Sancho and Don's adventures pretending to be fixers. There's a scene where they go to help a small shepherd's village. Finally, some fucking agriculture. Well, livestock, but nonetheless, farms finally fucking confirmed. While they're years upon years in the past, it's still a decent look at some kind of farming operation. This scene's existence alone helps us confirm that yes, proper food production is definitely a thing, and that there's room for it to boot. While there isn't anything even remotely high-tech in the scene, we can at least make the connection that there is a supply chain of sorts at this point. Anyhow, no congratulations dinner this time for the sinners, but we have at least gotten two rather big pieces of information. Now, LCE checkup gives me a confirmation on my suspicions. The sinners aren't being fed to full and are indeed being treated like prisoners. Hungry lions, even. Hohenheim directly addresses this as being the case, even going as far as to state that they wouldn't be sinners if given the luxury of 3 square proper meals a day. This harkens back to the underfeeding since Canto 1. I applaud the writers for remembering such a detail. Aside from that though, it doesn't really give us anything. On to my least favourite intervalo, Nocturnal Sweeping. We open up on cake. Supposedly even sinners get to have some New Year's fare. Aside from that though, we don't get all too much, as most of the events take place over the course of 24 hours. While it's one hell of a way to open up a new year, they end up spending a lot more time world building pretty much everything else in this seemingly foreign land. That being said, if I could read Chinese, there would probably be plenty to pick out, in the backgrounds at least. But alas, I can't read past the first 200 or so kanji, so I'll have to yield that point. Aside from that, is the mention of kezans. They offer food and board, that's really about it. Moving along, we've got Canto 8. There's a lot of food, like generational wealth levels of food waste. No wonder Greta was pissed. We get shown 2 different whole-ass food spreads. A third if we count the one from the credits too. All that to say, as long as you're rich, food ain't ever going to be an issue. It can also be assumed that the food on offer here is Chinese fare rather than Korean. There's a rather distinct difference, mainly in oil content and the types of peppers used, but otherwise, large spreads of Asian food, enough to kill a Victorian orphan. The credits illustration definitely has some of the dodgier stuff. I think Ishmael is holding up frogs even, while there's comically proportioned meats, fish, skewers, etc. We get a nicer look after the credits to reveal dumplings and other fare too. All of this is supposed to be leftovers from the previous night's banquet, and Rodya somehow manages to keep finding more and more of it. Anyhow, I'm not about to break down a whole bunch of Chinese cuisine without any confirmation, so we can move on to the latest affair. There's little to go off of in spring cultivation. No one's lessons are focused on cooking, at most poison detection. There's a few tools that are mentioned to avoid poison, but otherwise, we only get a mention of school lunchboxes. Essentially everything is too high class to bother homing in on or covering, and doesn't add all too much to our current understanding of the world's food. Now what? That's all Limbus has to offer now, right? We can basically sum up the city's cuisine as globalized Korean cafe with some select additions from various cuisines, right? Well, mostly Korean, right? Well, pretty much, yeah. Okay, fine, there's a couple of upside stories here and there that have food and drink, but it's all East Asian anyway. The Lus show off some noodles and dumplings. I think East Don has some noodles too. I think the Kurokumo and Blade lineage have some alcohol, but that's reasonably about it. We don't get any insights into revolutionary food technology or gastronomy, let alone anything to do with cannibalism or agriculture. Aside from those, we get Rodya snacking in a lot of the stories, especially the Dichi ones. Anyhow, after reading through all the material I did for this video, food is hand-waved quite hard in the city, outside of a few more interesting parts that they explicitly went out of their way to cover. While it still bugs me the lack of expansive agricultural space or primary production, there are just some things I wish added up more cleanly, especially the mention of Euclid preservation cans. That one kinda sent me for a bit. Regardless, thanks for watching another video. I know this one might not be the most interesting if you aren't into world building, but you can basically sum it up as Project Moon games, but only the parts where they talk about food. Next video is likely going to be breaking down the community tier list, and from then on, we'll see what I decide to end the year with. Once again, thanks for listening to the video.